History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon. We're super excited to be back from a little bit of a hiatus from Fannie Lou's classroom. We had some illness on our team, so we missed one Thursday, and of course the ice storm hit the following Thursday, so we couldn't get into the classroom, but we are here, we are back, and we are super duper excited about our guest that we have on today. But first, make sure you tell your friends, your colleagues, your family, everybody about Fannie Lou's classroom. Make sure you like us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit that notification bell so you can be alerted when Fannie Lou Classroom goes live. And of course, we always have to shout out our all-female engineering production team. We want to shout out Brooke, who is constantly holding it down in the studio. So let's give Brooke a round of applause. And of course, we have Roche Moore on the team, Cheryl Prelow, and Shanika Wilkerson. And I'm going to take a point of privilege here and just say happy birthday to Shanika. Today is her birthday, so we want to make sure we acknowledge that it's always good to have another year around the sun. So we certainly thank God and appreciate God for her life, her witness, and her ministry. Listen, super excited about today's conversation and what we call here at Friendship West the February edition of Black History, because we celebrate Black History 24/7, 365 here at Friendship West. So for a moment, let's step into the classroom before we get started with our amazing guest for today.
In Fannie Lou's classroom.
Now don't you dare be late. We need retention, not detention.
So one of the things I want to lift up into the class this morning, this Saturday, Friendship West will do a Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex bus tour called Freeman's Bus Tour, where we will be going around and locating and looking at historical markers of Dallas Black history and beyond Dallas, but in the Metroplex area. And as I began to look at some of the stops we were going to make, even I, as a bootleg historian, didn't know about a lot of these very much thriving communities and towns right here, right at our fingertips. And what I want to lift up on today that we'll be stopping by on Saturday on our bus tour is called Little Egypt. Little Egypt was located near White Rock Lake. The community began after the Civil War, when the site was deeded to formerly enslaved Jeff and Hannah Hill when they were freed in 1865. By 1870, they had built Little Egypt Baptist Church, and the community became known as Little Egypt because the residents were delivered from bondage. And as in the biblical story, though Little Egypt was officially within Dallas city limits, it remained a distinct community until 1962. At this time, the community residents were served by dirt streets and lacked running water, electricity, gas, and indoor plumbing. In May of 1962, the 200 residents of Little Egypt were moved to their new homes. The families were given enough money to buy new houses, and most of them settled either in Oak Cliff or in Rockwall County. In the 1980s, a controversy arose in which the former residents of Little Egypt were portrayed as being taken advantage of for the commercial gains of white developers. The land is now occupied by North Lake Shopping Center and large homes atop rolling hills. So I wanted to lift that up on today as we have this amazing conversation today, with the hopes that we pique your interest enough to go back and discover more of our amazing and rich history right here in Dallas. And if you're not from Dallas, when you visit, you can know what to put on your list of things to do when you come into the city. So now on to our guest for today. We have none other than Professor Clarence Glover, and I'm going to read just a short portion of his bio because it is quite lengthy, because he has so much he has done and so much he has yet to do. And you can read his full bio in the description on our YouTube channel page for today's episode. Professor Glover, a protege of Mrs. Coretta Scott King and other civil rights leaders, Professor Glover took up the mantle of the Civil Rights Movement Phase 2. He has been instrumental in achieving what Dr. Martin Luther King called institutionalizing nonviolent social change. In the 80s, he established the Department of Intercultural Relations and Minority Student Affairs at Southern Methodist University. In the 90s, he was also the founder of the Department of Intercultural Education for Dallas Independent School District. That's significant in this moment where we're having an attack on such classes and curriculum throughout the state of Texas. Now, while at SMU and DISD, he developed diversity harassment policies, which were among the first in the nation. In 1987, he testified with Mrs. Rosa Parks before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C. He is responsible for researching and locating the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speech that he gave at SMU on March 17, 1966. Professor Glover, through his company, Sankofa Education Services, has been instrumental in researching the history of Dallas's African-American communities, giving special attention to the periods of slavery and Jim Crow. Presently, he is working with the Bonner family of Dallas to shed light on the legacy and contributions of Anderson Bonner, a cotton farmer who was freed from slavery in 1865 and was able to amass 2,000 acres of land in North Dallas. We got to talk about that for sure, which now makes Medical City major corporations and North Central Expressway, as we know as I-75. He is the author and he's an author and a resident scholar at Pan African Connection Bookstore and Glendale Shopping Center in the Oak Cliff community right here in Dallas, Texas. Professor Glover is an ordained minister, senior pastor of First African Freedom Church, Dallas, Texas, and Bonwire, Ghana, West Africa. Professor Glover received his Bachelor of Arts in Science in History and Philosophy from Grambling State University in 1978 and his Master's of Theological Studies in African American Religion and Culture from SMU Perkins School of Theology. He is also a graduate of Harvard University Graduate School of Education with a certificate in Moral Education and Human Development. Please help me welcome Professor Clarence Glover to the classroom.
Thank you so very, very much, Pastor Ayers. It's a delight to be with you.
So, Professor Glover, man, so much just in your bio. We could be here all day just on that alone. But let's just kick it off and start with something that you told me that I wasn't familiar with, because it is part of Dallas history. I think you and I were on a program together at SMU not too long ago, and you mentioned that Dr. King, and it's in your bio as well, that Dr. King gave a speech at SMU. Talk to us about how you were a part of that, how you witnessed that, and why is that so significant today?
Well, it's very significant because on February the 21st of this month, SMU will be establishing a historical marker on the campus to commemorate when Dr. King spoke in McFarland Auditorium. When I arrived in 1979, there were many stories about Dr. King coming to Dallas. First of all, he came in 1956. He and Dr. Caesar Clark, Daddy King were very close. So Dr. Martin Luther King spoke at Good Street Baptist Church. He also spoke at the band shell with Dr. Rhett James, who was involved at that time. But the problem was that the city fathers, if you will, did not want a movement to come to Dallas. He spoke a couple of times, and then at the 1963 March on Washington, when some of the students from SMU went to that march, they came back wanting him to come. And there's an article in the Dallas Examiner, which you can Google, Martin Luther King and my name in the Dallas Examiner, and there's a full story about this. But when he flew into the city, the ministers, they said they turned him away. But they asked him a second time to come back, and Dr. Willis Tate then, along with the students, brought him to SMU. And there in McFarland on the 17th of March, 1966, he spoke on the theme of the history of integration. You can go to the site now and find that speech. Right now, Google it today and see the actual transcript and hear Dr. King. That's what I was emphasizing. However, when I arrived in 79 at a very unique time when the Old South was being celebrated at SMU, the KAs and the horses and the Confederate flags were being flown and the uniforms were being worn. And so we had to deal with those issues. But we had the first we had the first Martin Luther King holiday program, and I was asked to speak in Perkins Chapel in 1981. After that, Dr. Willis Tate came to me, and I said, did you know Dr. King spoke at SMU? I said, no, I heard he was running away from the city. Well, he said, no, we brought him back. I said, really? I said, well, how do we know that? Was it tape? He told me yes. And I asked him, where was the tape? And at that time, he didn't know, and I asked around, no one knew. So I began researching the campus, and over several years, I located the newspaper in the Dallas Daily Campus, and then also the actual speech, which is a reel-to-reel at the time. And so we transferred it to smaller tapes and then to digital, and eventually it became digitized. Well, over a period of years, I've worked with the Goya there, and we've had a sort of a miscommunication because I was encouraging for years that McFarland be established as a historical site. Well, when the process started, because I was a civil rights activist with Mrs. King and Dr. Lafayette and others, as I said to the panel, is that a lot of my work was built on institutionalizing nonviolence on the campus. Well, once we found the tape and we began to work toward that end, they began to work toward that end. They did not include me in the process of the recognition. So I have not been included in the process of this recognition, which is on February the 21st. But the work that we did, we framed the pictures, but this is also a part of the invisible man-woman syndrome that we experience as African Americans when we do something as scholars or as whatever, as workers and laborers, we're not recognized for the work. So we're right now in the midst of that, and there will be a program at McFarland. Reverend Richie Butler will be preaching St. Louis United Methodist Church. I've contacted Bernice King at the King Center. She can't attend, and so I'll be talking with them again this week to see what we can do to connect. I'm not a part of the program, but I'm asking to be a part of the program, to be recognized, because it was the work that we did with Dr. Tate's guidance that has led to this. Beyond that, this should be a time when we use the tape as a teaching moment. While at SMU also, Mrs. King commissioned me in 1986 to be the consultant and interviewer of In Remembrance of Martin, the first Martin Luther King holiday. We have been working ever since 79 and early on to make it a holiday. We celebrated it in the community, but in 1986, the official federal holiday was established, and I was the interview consultant. I'm sitting here like that, interviewing Mrs. King, Dick Gregory, Ted Kennedy, Bishop Tutu, Bernice King, and now it's called In Remembrance of Martin, the first national holiday. That said, SMU has two treasures, civil rights treasures. One, Dr. King's speech at SMU and McFarland Auditorium, and the documentary that I did while at SMU, which is entitled In Remembrance of Martin, and you can order it through PBS. You can order it through PBS, and you can listen to the speech online. And so we as a city, although Dr. King could not come here to have a movement, I would like to suggest that he did come here. And this is the movement that we're engaged in now, which I call Civil Rights Phase 2. And after Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer, as you said, who was sick and tired of being sick and tired, those of us, I'm 66, I was a child. Martin Luther King III and I are very close. Bernice, we've all worked together over the years, traveled, spoken. It is our responsibility to institutionalize nonviolent social change, and that's what we were doing, training students, training people, because it takes discipline to do this work.
Right.
So what we see now at SMU today, as we speak, we are engaging in trying to bring about social justice in regard to the tape and the articles, and you can read about it in the Dallas Examiner, again, Clarence Glover, Martin Luther King, and begin to see that history and that is filling those gaps. And I hope, if all is well, that I'll be on stage on February 28th with Pastor Richie Butler. I taught him at SMU, he and his wife, Nisha, in African American Studies. Very proud of him, very proud of Nisha.
Right.
So,
yeah, so I think you said so much that needs to be highlighted and pointed out. First of all, it is, I know you talked about the invisible man-woman syndrome, but it's also sometimes erasure, right? And so one of the things I'm thankful for, and hopefully, people will listen to this podcast, they'll share it so that people are clear on the history.
correct.
What brought us to this moment. And it was because of the labor of Professor Glover and others who took the time to do the research, to go and to dig and find that, to say, hey, this was here, Martin was here, and the work you did with Mrs. King in remembrance of Martin, and so forth and so on. So I think this is a way, right, of making sure that doesn't get lost, that is documented. So if someone is standing there on the 21st at this ceremony, they can say, well, we do know somebody's missing. If you're not there, they know, well, we're here because of Professor Glover's labor and others.
That's so important because this is all about Sankofa. This is all about reaching back. This is all about
That's right.
This is all about brick building, meaning brick on top of brick,
That's right.
brick on top of brick. I stand on the shoulders of all those. I'm a Jim Crow survivor, and I have to make that point very clear. I'm 66 years old, and my generation, we are the last of Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
Those who were born prior to I like to say 64, and experienced legal segregation, legal apartheid in America.
Yeah, right.
And we did not talk about it as much. So many of us went out of the cotton fields and out of the places. We didn't want to pick that cotton anymore.
Right.
And we left it behind to get an education, to give our children a better world,
That's
if
right.
you will.
Right.
But I think that what we should have done was to make sure that our history was properly documented. And that's what you're doing now. We're so excited about that. And so what I'm doing is just a part of what I was called to do, both spiritually and socially. And Dr. King did his generation. And this is called the social gospel for us.
Yes.
And so we do it in that liberation mentality.
That's right.
And so
That's right.
and we are the children that Moses led. The band all white looks like the band of Israelites.
Right.
So
That's right.
We wade in the water.
That's right. And to your point, this theology of Sankofa, right? And it's something that's liberating about that.
It's very liberating.
And so, in light of that, you are a researcher, and we are gearing up for our Freedmen's Tour on Saturday. Yes. As a researcher and understanding the power of Sankofa, how it can be liberating, and understanding that we are up against in Texas and throughout the nation, right, this assault on African American Africana studies. Right, being taught in schools, and even at the secondary level, like in colleges, they're now asking people for curriculum, et cetera. So talk to us about why it's so important that we not only research and recognize, but to make sure that we don't forget our past, right? And even like Black communities here in the Dallas area that you're very familiar with, that we'll be talking about on Saturday. So talk to us why that is so critical, important, and why, if it's not in schools, why we as church, as organizations, institutions, we own and control why it's important for us to make sure we tap into a Professor Clarence Glover or Emma Rogers, or those who hold that information, and how we get that to the next generation.
Excellent. Yes. Well, first of all, I'm AKA Professor Freedom. Most of the young people know me as Professor Freedom.
Well, I'm young, so let me start calling you Professor Freedom.
There you go, because you know why?
I know. Go ahead. Tell us why.
There you go. That's great. I take the chains off your brains so your minds can work. I take the chains off your brains so your minds can work. I take the chains off your brains so your mind can work. Because our ancestors, the first liberation movement was to take the chains off our bodies.
Right.
Okay. But they didn't have any chains on their brains. They wanted to learn how to read. They wanted to learn how to write.
Come on.
They wanted to learn how to be articulate. They wanted to learn how to be orators. So they had to fight to get the chains on their bodies. But now we have the chains on our brains. You see, and then we can't read and write now. And so we are having a struggle, about third grade. And so as I told students at South Oak Cliff, shout out to you, South Oak Cliff. That's my school now, and so we're over there working.
All right.
Not just, as I said to them the other day, we're going to make not athletic champions, but somewhat academic champions over here. Yes, and so we're going to talk about Sankofa champions over there. And so we're talking about going back to the past so that we can empower our future. And so that's what we're all about here. And so when you mentioned the academic piece, and this is so important because Texas in general, I said, is pivotal to the nation. Texas is the last southern state. Dallas is the last southern city. It's split between two. Fort Worth is the gate to the west. Dallas is the end of the southern aristocracy. So what happens in Texas and in Dallas is that the republic became a republic under Stephen F. Austin, his father Moses Austin. And what Stephen Austin said, he said, we can rise out of poverty, meaning the whites who were in the South at the time, the Low South they called it, by going to the Republic of Texas, which is Mexico, by raising cotton. But we cannot do it without the slaves. That is quoted. So when the Republic of Texas was formed, and then later on, a man by the name of William Peters, they wanted to draw people from Kentucky, Alabama, and Georgia here. So they gave every white man with every white man with a family, 640 acres of free land, 320 acres if you were a single person, white man. the Peters Colony from Oklahoma all the way down, then through Plano all the way down here to where I live in Elmthick and North Park, was the Peters Colony. And so these individuals came here with their enslaved Africans, not enslaved people. I like to change that too.
Yes.
Everywhere we hear today, enslaved people, no, they're enslaved Africans.
That's right.
We went from slaves to enslaved. I pushed that for years, like from black to African Americans. We advanced that. We did it first at DISD and it moved throughout the nation. But they were enslaved Africans from West Africa. But while I was assistant superintendent at DISD, which I left SMU, teaching African American studies and worked for DISD, we were able to establish the first multicultural education textbook adoption process in the country. By doing that, Dallas School District back in the 90s made sure that every textbook that was coming into the system was interculturally inclusive. That lasted for 10 years. When the Conservative State Board was in place during the time of the rise of what we call the conservative religious right, Newt Gingrich, Phil Gramm, Pat Robertson, so all these individuals, we then began to see things changing. And so that's when the attack came on the books. Because now Dallas and Texas was leading in making sure that the books were inclusive. But that was because we had a multicultural textbook adoption process. CRT is not a public school issue.
Right.
It is a legal issue, theory study in college.
Right.
So what we need to be looking at is how to make sure that we have the necessary things in place to make sure that our textbooks are inclusive, so that we can make the argument against the textbooks being just centrally focused on Eurocentric basis.
So I think that's good. So because what's probably not in our textbook currently, if our children are reading those, would be then, because you mentioned, post-enslavement, our ancestors, their thirst, right, for knowledge, for the formal education, because they were not uneducated, because I always say that too, right?
That was correct.
But formally educated. So talk to us about, one, I want to talk about why it's so important to recognize our African American communities historically, right? That have been erased off the map, and then I want you to talk about how did these communities emerge after the Civil War? What was it about us?
Well, first of all, because I come from the largest African American freedom community in the nation, which is I call it Cooper Road, Louisiana. Okay. And I'm working to get that Louisiana because we call it the Cooper Road, and the Cooper Road they would say it's large as Harlem and Watts, but we were never in New York or California. But what happened after 1865, when this in 1863, first of all with Lincoln, then 1865 in Texas, we had the beginning of Reconstruction. And at that point in time, public education was born out of the Reconstruction movement to educate freed African people. That's very important because poor whites were also included in that. But before that, only the aristocracy, white men, landowners, were being educated. So the public education system that we know today in America was an outgrowth of the Reconstruction movement, where African American senators and governors and the representatives were in the House of Representatives. That lasted for 10 years until Rutherford B. Hayes did what we call the Hayes debate in 1877, when a debate came up about the federal troops protecting the freed African men and women. Well, the Hayes-Rutherford debate then led to the pulling of the federal troops out of the South, which put in place Jim Crow for 100 years. And that's what Dr. King spoke to in Washington, D.C., at the March in Washington, when he said, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. And note the word Negro, which I am. On my birth certificate, I'm a Negro, which is a Spanish word for black.
Black, right.
So when we look at that whole education, there was a very complicated system, a sophisticated system during that time in the church, first of all, and that's why I advocate. I advocate three things of my company, Sankofa Education Services, educating African American students at home, at church, and in the community before we get to the public schools. So at that time, the church was not only the church I grew up, St. Paul, my great-great-grandfather deeded the land for church and school purposes. So I challenged today African American congregations should develop sophisticated educational programs, not simply on Sunday mornings,
Amen.
but rather throughout the week, in the evenings, on the
That's right.
weekends, because we have now some of the largest facilities that are not used. They're not cost effective from a business standpoint.
Right.
So we should have programs, activity, and museums and places where the artifacts are collected and so forth, and where not just having a funeral, but able to have all of the
Right.
programs organized. The funeral program, that's history.
That's right.
So people can come and say, well, who was here? My grandparents. A funeral program is a legal document that should be housed properly for future references.
Now, I think you're really hitting something here, right? And I think this is what it means to, and I think it lends, well, let me ask you this next question, because I think it lends itself to the next question, and you're kind of answering that, and that is, what does this existence or this, what we know historically, what we're learning still and unearthing for a lot of us, about Black towns thriving, not just surviving, but thriving towns and neighborhoods. Like in Tulsa, that wasn't a city, that was a neighborhood that was so fully functional, right? Separate and apart from white folks, right? So talk to us about why, what's this? I think it's important for young people to understand what, and Dr. Jeremy Wright might say it like in his book, what makes you so strong?
Well, first of all, I'm not an integrationist. I'm a desegregationist. I did not believe then, nor do I believe now, that African American people or any people have to be forced to be in place with another people to educate them.
Right.
What happened is that we put children in harm's way. I lived in a community where we had our own water district, our own sewer district in Cooper Road. We had our own schools, daycare to college, where I saw my father and other men and women in our community build a community. Mount Bayou, Mississippi, which was a community. We have them all over the country. We have them all over East Texas.
Yes.
We've had all of these communities where we were self-sufficient, and that's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing.
But I think what happened is that we had the perception that we needed to leave those communities and come over, as old folks say, ice is cold on the other side, grass is greener. And when we integrated, we experienced that white flight and white fear that was then imposed back upon us. And those communities we went to, then the services were reduced and pulled back, and then we got into ghettos, you see.
Right.
And so subsequently, now we need to go back and look at that. We on our own can do those things when given the support that we duly should have. We did build this country on cotton. Cotton Dallas, Texas is the largest inland cotton exchange in the world at the time. 1/6 of the world's cotton was picked within 150-mile radius of Dallas.
Wow.
Robert Munger came here in Deep Element, in the 1800s, brought the cotton gin making machine on one end of Elm Street where y'all be traveling. On the other end, in the Texas Depository, which is a sixth-floor museum, they made the plows, the mill busters to break the grand. So here in Dallas was the center point for the Industrial Revolution that put us into what is called international capitalism. We were the labor force for that. Booker T. Washington's son-in-law, William Sidney Pittman, built the Knights of Pythian, one of the first major African-American architects in the nation. And yet he was in jail because he spoke out, because of what he did, things he did. And so we need to understand, even with Africa, the concept of Pan-Africanism. Dr. King, really after the Montgomery movement, went to Ghana, celebrating the liberation of Ghana from Britain. You can listen to him with his message, Dr. King, The Birth of a New Nation. You can Google it. Powerful message that we took our marching orders, because Dr. King says, if Ghana could free itself from the British, then we can continue this movement over here using nonviolence, the principles of nonviolence, Gandhi, the teachings of Jesus, and others, and break the back of oppression. So what happened, they did that. But we had this compromise between integration and desegregation.
Right.
Now, desegregation says you have the right to eat and go where you want to go. I have a right to go if I want to go to that school.
You want to go, right.
If I want to go. But Then we began to see this resegregation again, where we all will see today, where we have the resegregation. So now that we see resegregations, where we see many African American communities and predominantly white communities now, I think we should focus on how are we creating a healthy sense of our own community.
Right.
You see, just like you see Hispanic communities today, circles of the Asian communities in Dallas. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to understand, we as an African-American community, and many Africans are coming here now because of the civil rights movement and immigration laws that open up. The Nigerian community is now the largest African community here, and economically, look at the politics, look at the news, look at what they're doing. We need to build bridges there.
Yeah, I agree with, and it's so interesting you brought that up. Next week, we'll be talking about the fact that we should see ourselves as part of the larger African diaspora. And so we're going to have that conversation next week with Dr. Esmira Davis. So we're going to really dig into that, because based on what you're saying, I think that is even, we have to expand how we see ourselves in the world.
Most of our strength comes from our international connections,
absolutely.
our roots.
Absolutely. And it's like I tell people, Dr. John Henry Clark said it best, right? The only difference is a boat stop.
That's right.
Right? That boat dropped off Africans.
That's correct.
In these different places. So, but getting back to the conversation. So two things. One, when you talk about why, when we look at our history in terms of our thriving communities, what was so important about that was that we had a sense of our identity. We had a sense of who we are, where we were going, right? And so I think it was called Jim Crow's Pink Slip. It's a book that was written, and what happened with desegregation was a lot of our teachers who really loved on, who could be the ones that love on us, teach us, know who we are, see us as fully human, were fired, lost their jobs.
They lost their principles.
Yes,
all
of that went away.
That's correct.
So now you have black children in these integrated schools who are now under this white aesthetic gaze, in my opinion. That's what I would call it. And how we're seen and viewed and treated, right? And so I think, for me at least, the power in going back, not just learning the history, it's not just to learn it, because what Sankofa is going back fetching, but it's also picking up and how, and what that means for our future. And so for me, how do we make sure that because I know in February everybody want to know about Black history, but how do we get us to see that it's not just that it's okay to be African, but it's essential that we see ourselves as African, and to understand what it means not to just learn our history, but learn it, and then what does it tell us on how we ought to move forward, so that, and I'm not saying, I believe people can go live where you want to live, wherever your money can have you to live. Yes. But I'm saying something needs to bind us together. I think about Little Italy in Philadelphia, Greektown in Detroit, Chinatown in San Francisco.
Everywhere.
So, and I'm sure all the Italians don't live in Little Italy, but when it's time to discuss politics, to circulate their economics, et cetera, that's where they go. Well, so how can we create that?
First of all, a free people must create and write a freedom dictionary. We must have our own dictionary of terms. You can't take oppressed terms and be a free people.
Come on.
A part of what I've attempted to do over the years was, first of all, as we've gone from colored, Negro, all to black. When I was at SMU, I was on the board, on the committee with DISD. It's all documented. And I offered that we be called African Americans. They were being called black students then. And people asked me why. I'm not from Africa. I said, no, you're not from Africa, but Africa is in you. We had a lot of debate back then. Plus, I said that black is not a geopolitical reality. There's no place called black on the map. Right. So if you're in a classroom and everybody's talking about Europe, we can go to Europe.
Right. That's right.
We got South America. We can talk about South America. Every student that can talk about something but us. Well, where's black on the map? There's no black, but there's a big continent there called Africa with black people. That was my push. So I wanted our students. So that's DISD changed its name from black to African Americans.
Now, this before, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember my history here. Was it Reverend Jackson who pushed for it to be changed to African American, or it started before that?
Reverend Jackson was talking about it. Yes, he was talking about it.
Okay.
I'm going back to saying what Civil rights phase 2 is institutionalizing. What I did was institutionalize it, not just say it.
Right.
We changed the name from black to African American at Dallas Independent School District, so that they had to be known on their records as African American students. How many African American students in it? That's a change. We created the multicultural adoption process so that African American studies or curriculum could be included in the textbooks and so forth. Yes, Reverend Jackson was very popular. He is.
It was, right.
Yes, he was talking.
So
about
was this happen parallel?
Right, during the same time. But
Okay,
as I said, he was talking it.
Yeah, for sure.
But we institutionalized it.
No, yeah, I'm clear on that.
I
was trying to get my, I'm always trying to have my stuff correct. Like, was this happen simultaneously? Because that's how things happen too, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
But I think also to your point, and everybody who knows me knows, my main thing is how are we going to institutionalize the movement so that the next generation is not starting from scratch, that we're passing up a ton up and against.
What you're doing today is part of that. To have here in Friendship West, which I have been working from Friendship West ever since they were on Polk.
Oh, yes.
On Keys.
Okay.
I've been training Operation Black. I trained
Yeah.
men at Operation Black about the African-centered consciousness here, the Ankh, all of that, the broken chains that they wear, that they talk about. I trained Brother Pastor Haynes and Brother Pastor Fitzgerald and Brother James Allen and all of those brothers. We go all the way back. So now here we are in the studio.
Yes.
So we can now use technology to expand this. And I thank you for allowing me to come and share this historical journey, because we began to look at these data points along the way that people can put together. Just like I just said, the DISD name, the multicultural textbook process, the speech of Dr. King at SMU, the daily force policy here in Dallas, which in the 80s, when Chief Prince was there, we said, okay, do you have a daily force policy? We reviewed that daily force policy and moved from property over life to life over property. Got rid of the chokehold. Did the first multicultural training school sessions for the Dallas Police Department. All of that Dallas is history.
Yeah, and I think to your point, having it institutionalized then helps you to build on that, because we know it.
Brick on brick.
Brick on brick,
It's
right?
brick on brick.
And I always, people know I love, Angela Davis, one of my many women that I look up to, right? And this notion of freedom is a constant struggle. And while we have to be reminded that every generation, we have the obligation, right, to take this to another level. Like we're responsible for moving us further along this trajectory that we're on. Because I tell people in terms of Dallas, I think by and large, and I could be a little biased, I think Friendship West is an anomaly in terms of how we see body and soul, no separation, of how we believe Jesus and justice, that we're not silent on what happens in people's lives between Sundays, right? But I think that the Black church still, with all of its challenges, right? And we have many. But I think we still remain that institution in our communities that is wholly owned and controlled by us. To your point, where we can take our buildings, we can take our land, we can build that to what we need it to be.
That's
when
correct.
you think about Black Wall Street, one of the first buildings that went up was the church.
Everywhere. On the plantation, it was the church.
It was the church, right?
Yes.
Because our ancestors understood that it wasn't necessarily to build the brick and mortar, because before the brick and mortar, as you know, they were in the bushes.
Brush harbors, they call them.
Right.
Brush harbor.
The hush harbor. Down the hush harbors, worshiping the God they knew.
Hallelujah.
Not the God that was up in the big house.
Kumbaya.
Okay? So I think that how do we, because we can still, in my opinion, we can still use like that churches who are progressive, who see that we cannot be tethered to death-dealing systems and death-dealing policy and death-dealing people. But how do we use life-giving power to use the church to build out these towns, these communities that we're going to visit on Saturday, that we know that we're thriving? It's important to do that. How do we do that? What would be, so you've already talked about how churches can use them as, our church houses as educational institutions, i.e. we know that's where a lot of some of our HBCUs got started.
Exactly.
Churches birthed those institutions. So what are some of the things that, well, first of all, let me back up. Tell us what is a freedmen's town? Tell us what is a freedmen's town?
Freedmen's Town, again, was founded after the Civil War, where we gathered in safe spaces away from white people at the time. Similar to Joppy over here, over there, short North Dallas. Dallas proper was around what we call Hyde Regency area. You start looking at the French area, then you start seeing the East Dallas area where the rich whites, Ross Avenue, et cetera. Then you see South Dallas where the Jewish community lived, you see. And so when even before the history of Dallas, we didn't understand. In 1860, Dallas was burned down. The business district was literally burned down. You can Google that. And it was burned down by 3 men. And there's Martyrs Park now over near Trinity. And it was believed that the white abolitionists and these 3 men, one was named Cato and others who burnt the city down. I suggest that it was around cotton because Dallas was the largest, cotton, you had to work. So, but that's a very important point. These were men who took it on their own to make a statement at that time. And we say very little about them because when we talk about black men who fight for freedom or black women who fight for freedom, we create a negative image of them. Mm-hmm. You understand? And that's just like when I think about Toussaint L'Ouverture in Haiti, the only free country in the West, but he defeated the French and became an independent country. But yet, to this day, they're paying reparations to the French.
Right. Because
they took away their enslaved people. So we need to understand how to come here, and we're doing it here today. So that I commend you for what you're doing. But we must expand this here in Friendship West, in this building, in other buildings.
Right.
But also the institutions that are around us. You said something earlier. Our churches, not only did they deal HBCUs, but they were schools on Monday morning.
Right.
They would, and what I challenged you today for us to think about, so that hopefully beyond this, hopefully this won't be my last time, but that we are able to have Saturday schools and have opportunities to bring out, like other cultures do.
That's right, exactly.
And bring our children together.
Exactly.
And have our rituals like bar mitzvah and bar mitzvah, and create our Sankofa rites of passage programs. So establish our, I'm a senior citizen now. I have a new revolution. I'm not the old senior citizen. Okay? So I'm not going to be the one rocking on the porch waiting for the mailman. Mm-hmm. So we have to create a new society where many of our young men and women don't have a grandfather, or father.
Yeah.
Or mentor.
Well, yeah.
So we have to help provide them with that grandfather, that grandmother that they need. So Sankofa, they have something to go back and fetch from somebody.
That's right.
And to tell them, as I told them at SOC the other day, I said, I'm 66 years old. And my great-grandfather and grandfather told me, make sure your stuff is paid for. And they looked at me, and said, what's your stuff? I'm talking about that. My house is paid for. My car is paid for. My truck is paid for. I have 2 houses. My stuff is paid for.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
What about you? Will your stuff be paid for at 66? More so, will you get to be 66? The word is on the street out that y'all won't even get to be 40. And they looked at me with their eyes. I said, yes, that's the word on the street. The fact that some of you can't even read and write now. And it created an emotional moment. And I said, look among yourselves. Who's going to be here 50 years from now? I don't do scholars. I don't do students. I do scholars. I'm a scholar.
Yeah.
I'm a scholar. I was raised by scholars. My mother and father were scholars. My great-grandparents, they were scholars. Mm-hmm. Scholars get scholarships. I didn't pay 1 penny to go to Grambling, SMU, or Harvard. I have to say that so they can see me.
Right.
If they see me, they can be them.
That's it.
You understand?
Exactly.
To be a star, you have to see a star. And if that star looks like you have a better chance of being that star. You see?
Yeah.
So subsequently, you have to be able to say that scholarship. So I want you to study. I don't want you to be a student. I don't do students because a student lives and reads studies for the moment.
That's
for the test. They want to get a C or D, a student. But a scholar is a lifetime learner who won't compromise. All they want for A's and B's. School is cool and the teachers are tight. I'm going to learn how to read and write. School is cool and the teachers are tight. I'm going to learn how to read and write. You see?
Yeah.
No C's, no D's. All I want are A's and B's, no C's, no D's. All I want are A's and B's. Word.
Yeah. I think that's so important, though, right?
My scholars, the rhythm and rhyme of learning.
And we don't even have time to go into the ways in which black children learn. That's a whole nother topic.
I'm coming back, right?
That's another topic because that needs to be addressed. And that, what was lost in segregation, right?
Hey, no more school parties that you have looking forward to this party after school. Because you gonna make sure that everybody in the class gonna get their work right, because we want that after school party at the end of the school year, because we want to dance and we want to see the teachers dance with us, and mama bring the food up to the school, and grandmama come up there. We all having a good time and everything.
And to your point, those are things that we have to bring back. To bring back sense of community, right?
That's right?
And you have to connect with people. And we cannot do it being so disconnected. And I know it's a lot of work for us to do. We can't do it all in an hour. But I always want to at least, let's have a conversation. Let's open it up. And hopefully people will then think, well, let me go read a little bit. Let me think about this some more. So the goal of Fannie Lou's Classroom is always that we always have a Sankofa moment. And we always think about what we're going to do now. Because I'm always about awareness and action. And so I want to go back to close out this segment with this. As we tour these towns and these spaces, these landmarks on Saturday, as you mentioned about the city being burned down, as you mentioned, I didn't know that about Dallas, that we produced that we were the Cotton King, right? And how how you talk about how it was developed from the 6th Street Museum and the cotton. So for me, when I hear all of that, then I see these so-called consulting reports from the city of Dallas talking about these equity reports, housing equity, racial equity, and then people want to fight us against reparations.
That's why my article, Jacob Vaughn, who I thank so very much, in the Dallas Observer, Reckoning Cotton. You can Google it, Reckoning Cotton under the Dallas Observer. You have to have a data point. You have to have something that says this is why we're saying this. It's not because this is not a begging. This is not issues of begging.
Come on.
This is not about the issue, because we have in America, we talk about this ideology. If you work hard, you'll make it. Well, that's not true in the African American community. That's not true for women.
Hello.
Women and people of color have worked hard in America.
Yeah.
But in spite of the working hard, they have not achieved. So, and this is not also to say, let me just say this about my white brothers out there. When I was working with the Dallas Police Department, I said the most oppressed person in the 21st century would be the white male. I have a deep concern for white men. I'm a man. I have a warrior spirit. I know what it means to work. We don't produce on the inside. We produce on the outside. Women are internal producers. So we create on the outside. What we build, we value. And so what happens is that when you took that away from a white man in the civil rights movement, nobody said, okay, how would they react to that? When you take this away, when you say now you have to share this and that. When I say that is that we have to be aware. January the 6th, I knew it was going to happen. People even called me and said, you told us that years ago. I told you. You don't. He's a person. He's a man. And there's some issues we can talk about later regarding that.
Right.
Yeah. Because and everybody, you look at, because when I say that, I'm talking about just as we want them to look at us as being human, we must recognize that they are human too. It's to the extent that their reaction, for every cause, for every effect, there's a there's a cause and effect.
For sure.
So that's a deep area place to go. But my point is that if we are to build for ourselves, it's like we have to build over here, but we don't want you to come up and destroy it once we build it. See.
Yeah, yes. But I'm also thinking through that white men have work to do. White folk got their own work to do.
No, that's what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is that for me, let me be clear.
Yeah.
I have a mission.
Uh-huh.
I just preached at Jarvis Christian the other day. My sermon was Amazing Grace, the race to save white America. So yes, we have to be able to say, just as they go as missionaries to other people, someone has to speak to their condition and challenge them to do the moral and the right thing.
Oh, for sure. Right.
You see?
Right.
Because that's what Dr. King understood. He says we're caught in a single garment of mutuality, tied in a single fabric of destiny. One affects one, affects the other. Yeah,
I definitely agree with that. And I'm thinking through, when we talk about what we're pushing for, and like you're saying, how do we also think about, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what I just heard you say, you could predict January 6th because you're saying you're, I guess, understanding how they're going to respond to perhaps these changes, these demographic shifts, and this notion of them thinking something is being taken away from them.
Let me just share with you. I've never said this before publicly. I will because I saw it on television the other day, and I took a picture. I've never said it publicly.
Okay.
You need to understand the Turner's Diary. The Turner Diary is the book of extreme white supremacists. Mm-hmm. It's been used in Oklahoma, Columbine, Waco, all these places. April 19th is an official white supremacist holiday. April 20th is the birthday of Hitler. My birthday is April 19th. I spent years, every April 19th, waiting for another event to happen. I've never shared this publicly. The Eternal Diary. It was the book that guided January the 6th. It's like the same thing that African American young men are reading today, the 48 Laws of Power. Robert Greenleaf, which guides them into Machiavellian warfare, which now has been reversed because they kill each other. And they wear the hoods from Machiavellian. So yes, I'm sharing something for you need to understand that there's something that undergirds most of all of our actions, some theoretical principle
Sure.
that is transferred into the larger society.
Sure, and I think some of the ideology that they carry, though, that is very dealing to black folks and everybody else. And I'm always wondering how and of course, this is a whole nother conversation and topic. I'm getting off. Well, maybe I want to stay on topic because I really want to be true to make sure people walked away understanding the rich history of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex as it relates to Freeman's Towns, how Freeman's Towns were formed, shaped, developed, why they were destroyed, and what we must do to preserve that history and also to move forward to rebuild.
When you look at Shore North Dallas, Thomas and Hall, and the communities were created based upon rural and what we call sophisticated Negro communities. Thomas and Hall was more of the upper class African American communities that was closer to the Highland Parks and the maids and the other people. In Dallas here, the African American woman had the most power because she was the cook. She was the one who was taking care of the children. And that's the case anywhere because she had that personal relationship with the family.
Right.
And so then we had Joppy out there, which was more rural. And they came from East Texas as well, but they were the rural African American. Then we had North Dallas, where I live, because William Cochran brought the first cotton to Dallas in the 1840s. Love Field was an airport, which became a training site for the aviation, which then became Love Field. So he brought the first cotton. So we see that area, Elm Thicket. But for the north, we have White Rock. Okay, so you have White Rock, which is where my African brother elder. Anderson Bonner.
Put it in front of the mic so people can kind of see the cover of the book too. Like, can it go in front of the mic? Like, put your over. Yeah, there you go. Come out. Help them, Brooke.
Okay.
There you go. I want people to see that.
Oh no, you talking about?
Yeah, so they can see that in
our stories.
Yeah.
And Anderson Bonner, who in 1865 was brought here as a pioneer, and had 2,000 acres of land. This is an African man, complete. You can look at it.
2,000 acres.
Yes, we're Medical City and all of that. And now I'm offering to them with the racial equity task force and others in the city that we build on Central Expressway the Anderson Bonner Cultural Center, so that we would have that as a place for archival purposes in the North Dallas area. Because North Dallas was far more African American today. Booker T. Washington edition, George Washington Carver called Carver's Courts. And so we have all of this, you see.
Yes.
And they went that way and moved through African land, McShann Street, and then began to gentrify and with eminent domain take land to build what we know today is North Dallas.
In the Highway Act, which drove freeways through a lot of our black, not just in Texas, but throughout the country.
You split the community,
yes.
And so then we had the Congo Street, which is over by the fairground, the Cotton Bowl, if you will, which is the shortest street in Dallas called Congo in Jubilee community. So as you move around this week, you'll be seeing these areas which have now become major Dallas communities. And there are a few of us. I live in Dallas, in Elm Thicket. There are not very many of us who live in North Dallas, African Americans. When I travel around my community, I'm very much one of the very few African-American persons moving in and out of the mine.
And I'm sure many folks don't know is we're at North Park and we're at all these places having a good time, not knowing that we're on sacred ground.
And then Caruth Plantation there, which was owned by him and his workers, his pioneers. And by the way, for my family, as Glover, George Glover came from Alabama, brought his family. His son, William Glover, was the first white man born in Dallas County. In my research, I found the connection between the Glover family, who was white, and my family, which is black. We got our name from the white Glovers, which many of us did.
Right.
And there is a Glover Cemetery on Military Parkway. There's a Glover Park, and so forth. So as we go out and look at these stories, if you will, in our city, our stories,
Yeah.
and find some new sense of purpose.
Yes.
I hope that new generation, as you just said, we can find ownership of land, that we can begin to develop skills again.
Yes. Yes.
We must do that.
Yes.
As we hear now, as we hear in the president, manufacturing is coming back to America, you see. We must be a skilled people as well. We were the most skilled people in America at one time.
In the world before enslavement.
That's right.
Right?
Before enslavement, in the whole Pan-African tradition, again, African American. See, we are African Americans. Those of us born in America. Then there are African Africans.
African Africans.
African Africans who come from Africa.
Yeah.
But their children who are born here are African Americans. So now we have to develop relationships.
That's right.
Because heretofore, they used African Africans as if they say they weren't like us. You know, and we were, and so there was a rift between us. So now we must bring that relationship together and create an international Pan-African understanding, just as Dr. King and Kwame Nkrumah were beginning to do. Please listen to Ghana, the Birth of a New Nation.
Yes.
By Dr. Martin Luther King at the liberation of Ghana. And I hope that if things, as I said to others, on February the 21st, we hope that SMU do the right thing.
We hope they do the right thing. And I think to your point, because for me, obviously, part of my training is from Dr. Ivor Carruthers, who is certainly a Pan-African. It's her and her husband, Jacob Carruthers, who taught himself, Egyptian hieroglyphs, just understanding what it means to be Black and Christian in the world, but more importantly, what does it mean to see yourself as African and part of the larger diaspora. So I want to, time has ran out, and we're going to have you not just back on the classroom, but we need to talk about what we do outside of the classroom, because I think somewhere in here it's not only understanding the history, but how does that inform what we build? Because I'm a big person on how do we institutionalize what we're doing.
Well, let me just say this:
So,
I'm the founding speaker at the Third Eye Conference here in Dallas. Many of my students who were a part of the Third Eye back then, who helped give birth to the Third Eye, and the first lecture that I gave at this conference was a theology of liberation for African American churches. And it was the second, this was over 30 years ago now.
Yeah.
So as you talk about Dr. Carruthers, we must, however, find a balance, because we had what was called at that time the Afrocentric movement, and then
I'm speaking of Dr. Carruthers as a personal mentor and mother figure. So I'm bringing her.
Please,
yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
I know all of Dr. Ben and so forth. What I'm saying is that there is a need to balance between the research of Dr. Yosef Ben Yakana, Dr. Carruthers, Dr. So many others, and you have Dr. Van Sertima. Then over here you have Dr. Sierra Lincoln, Dr. Jacqueline Grant, who are considered to be the Dr. James Cone and Cecil Cone. And when we bring those two camps of thoughts together, along with our civil rights communities and our freedmen towns, we're getting a holistic picture of our movement here in America, because as we see people, as we wear our unks and our Africas and so forth, as one lady said at the Third Eye Conference, she said, if you're looking for Africa, she was from the Caribbeans. She said, many of you are looking for Africa. She said to us, she said, I have the tape, she says, look in your grandmother's pot. Look into her backyard. Look into your spaces and places where African, the first churches that were here in America were called African churches. The first African church of Savannah, Georgia. Richard Allen, African church. Absalom Jones, African church. They knew they were Africans here.
For sure. And I think to your point, and the point I was making, I'm glad you further expanded that, because I think in some of those thoughts where you're saying they have to come together, I think you already have intersection, right? In a Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr., right? I think some of them are already, I think there's an intersection in between being African-centered, Pan-African, and those who also understand this other side, this church, this American side of it, right?
Well, let me just close on this, and Dr. Jayden here, and Pastor Haynes, you may have heard this. When I did the workshops here for the camps of the retreat, I shared a concept of my model, and that is that you must be able to first get your theology in order, so that your Christology is in order, that your psychology is in order, that your biology is in order, and that your sociology is in order. And in that order that I shared with Pastor Haynes and other men here at the retreat, is that, and then Pastor Jeremiah Wright has shared that also in his writings. And so we do see that. So we are those of us who adorn and wear, and we began to see foreigners going out to the plantation. Realize the plantation is a place where we grow food. We go out to these old plantation churches and have our sacred ceremonies. So we ritualize as we come to Freedman Cemetery on Saturday. We're going to ritualize. We're going to give thanks for our ancestors, those whose lives were here.
Absolutely.
And
right.
then out of that, we're able to receive a spirit of empowerment.
Yes, so I think to your point, a lot of thought leaders, a lot of us who have different ways of being have to come together as Black folk. Right?
Ubuntu.
That's right.
Ubuntu.
That's
I cannot be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you cannot be what you ought to be. So as we have a principle, Ubuntu and Harambe, let's practice our principle of Ubuntu and Harambe. And to that I say Ubuntu, my sister.
And to that I say Ashe.
Ashe.
So thank you, Professor Freedom.
Hallelujah.
Glover.
Hallelujah.
This has been very rich. You have so much, not just wisdom, but knowledge. And that is what I think we're sorely missing in our community today is like facts, knowledge, history, and, giving us a lot to think about, a lot to chew on, but also not just that, but what we need to do to move forward. I know that conversation is an ongoing conversation because everybody has a way of how we might move forward. But I hope to come back and talk more about what we do now and being clear about what we entertain and what we don't entertain. I'm always kind of guided by, Sonia Sanchez, but how do it free us? And if it doesn't, then it ought not be part of what we're doing. Right. So I'm super excited you were here. Can't wait to have you back. And I'm sure we'll be talking.
Let me just say to my young people out there, all of you, find an elder, not just in February. I'm an elder now. Find an elder. An elder, find you a young person. And let us begin the process of Sankofa. Let's work together.
Yes.
So let's create, I'm challenging you and the Friendship West, let's create some elder and youth connections. So that when we get together, we have some young folks, and we talk and we laugh like mama, grandmama in the room, and we dance and we eat together, but we need to be in the room because you can't go anywhere if you haven't been there. Okay? Right. So somebody has to guide, somebody has to give you direction.
Right.
So we hope that we can find, I'm looking out my elders, Mama Oprah Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, who celebrated her birthday at my house. We work together. Yes, I follow her. We all need elders, and we all need children.
To your point, we're lifelong learners.
Scholars.
We're
no
lifelong
students.
Scholars, no students. But that we should always have that posture that we can always learn something new today. Yes. And somebody always has something to offer us.
Brain plasticity.
Come on, keep it going.
Keep it going.
So listen, let's give it up for Professor Freedom Glover, who is in the classroom on today. We appreciate all he's poured out to us, and we pray that God will bless you 100-fold as you move from this place. And listen, make sure you join us next Thursday, which looks like it's going to be a continuation of this conversation. I didn't know it was going to go this way, but that's why we love the classroom. It's free-flowing. We're going to talk about this Pan-African connection, how we see ourselves as part of the diaspora with Dr. Asmira Davis. You certainly don't want to miss next week. It's going to be a very powerful conversation as we continue our February edition of Black History right here in the classroom. Right? Make sure you like us on Facebook, Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell so you can be alerted when we go live. And make sure you share today's podcast with everybody you know and everyone you know to make sure they become part of Fannie Lou's classroom so they can step into the classroom. We can all learn together. This is designed to be a dynamic learning community, and this is what we're doing by bringing you the best so we can have robust conversation and also laugh in the process. So thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next week right here in the classroom.
From the church house.